A blind man enters a luxurious hotel, but the waitress mocks and humiliates him, completely unaware that he is the owner of the establishment. What happens next will leave you speechless. Watch until the end to see the shock and twist, and don't forget to subscribe and tell us in the comments, what would you do in his place? The elegant lobby of the Aurora Hotel buzzed with the chatter of guests and the soft clinking of glasses from the nearby bar. Known for its opulence and impeccable service, the Aurora was a haven for those seeking luxury. Among the polished marble floors and gilded chandeliers, the staff moved with practiced precision, their uniforms pristine and their manners flawless, or so it seemed. The atmosphere was serene, with guests lounging in plush armchairs, discussing business or sipping on expensive cocktails. That serene air, however, was about to be disrupted. Through the grand revolving doors walked a man, guided by a cane and wearing dark glasses that shielded his unseeing eyes. He was dressed modestly, in sharp contrast to the designer suits and dresses surrounding him. His movements were careful but confident, as if he was no stranger to unfamiliar spaces. But in this space, the world judged on appearances. He paused near the entrance, his cane tapping lightly against the marble. A waitress named Clara noticed him immediately. She was one of the newer staff members, known for her sharp tongue and, at times, condescending attitude toward guests she deemed out of place. Clara rolled her eyes as she watched him, her disdain evident. "Ugh, another one of those," she muttered under her breath, loud enough for the other nearby staff to hear. A couple of them exchanged uncomfortable glances, but said nothing. Clara was brash and opinionated, and most of her colleagues avoided conflict with her. The man stood silently, appearing to listen to the sounds around him. Clara finally walked over, her heels clicking against the floor with an edge of impatience. "Sir, this is a five-star establishment," she said, her tone cold and dismissive. "I think you might be lost." The man turned his head toward her voice, a small smile gracing his lips. "I'm not lost," he said kindly. "I'd like a table, please." Clara raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a smirk. "We don't exactly serve charity cases here. Maybe there's a diner down the street better suited for you." The words hung in the air, sharp and cutting. The guests nearby turned to look, a few in disbelief, others uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. The man's smile faltered slightly, but he remained composed. "I'm here for a meal, just like everyone else," he replied calmly. "If you could guide me to a table, I'd appreciate it." Clara crossed her arms and tilted her head, clearly unimpressed. "Look, buddy," she began, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "We cater to a certain clientele here. You don't exactly scream, 'elite.' Maybe you should try somewhere else. Continua. Tu dehiste. Continua. Chat GPT Plus. Chat GPT." The blind man's calm demeanor remained unshaken, but those who were watching began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. A few murmurs passed between guests who had caught Clara's words, though none were brave enough to step in. "I assure you," the man said softly, his voice steady, "I have every right to dine here. Now, could you please lead me to an available table?" Clara sighed dramatically, tapping her foot. "Fine, but don't expect any VIP treatment, okay? Follow me and try not to bump into anything." Her words dripped with condescension as she grabbed a menu and began walking briskly toward a table tucked into a less visible corner of the restaurant. The man followed carefully, his cane tapping softly against the polished floor. Clara didn't bother to slow her pace or turn back to check if he was keeping up. When they arrived, she set the menu on the table with a loud thud. "There, you can sit here," she said curtly, "but don't expect much attention. We're busy, and this isn't exactly prime seating." The man ran his hand along the back of the chair before sitting down gracefully. "Thank you," he said, still composed. "Could I trouble you for some water to start?" Clara raised an eyebrow, looking down at him as if he were an inconvenience. "Sure," she said flatly before turning on her heel and walking away, muttering under her breath, "What a waste of time." As Clara returned to the kitchen, she made no effort to hide her disdain. "Can you believe we're serving him?" she said to her co-worker Emma, who had been quietly observing the interaction from a distance. "I don't know why people like him even bother coming to places like this." Emma hesitated, uncomfortable with Clara's tone. "Clara, I think you might be—" "Please," Clara interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. "He's probably just here to take advantage of the complimentary bread or something." Emma bit her lip but said nothing more. She didn't agree with Clara, but speaking out against her wasn't easy. Meanwhile, back at the table, the man sat patiently, his head slightly tilted as if listening to the murmurs of the restaurant around him. Guests continued to glance in his direction, some with curiosity, others with pity. A few whispered among themselves, their voices just loud enough to reach his ears. "Why would someone like him come here? Do you think he knows how expensive this place is?" It wasn't long before Clara returned with a glass of water, setting it on the table with little care. Some of it splashed onto the tablecloth, but she didn't apologize. "Here's your water," she said curtly. "Are you actually ordering anything, or is this just a sit and soak in the atmosphere kind of thing?" The man's smile returned, soft but knowing. "Yes, I'd like to place an order," he said. "Could you read the specials to me?" Clara groaned audibly, rolling her eyes as she flipped open the menu. "Fine, but make it quick. We've got paying customers to serve." She rattled off the specials in a bored tone, clearly irritated. As she did, the man nodded politely, occasionally asking for details about the dishes. Finally, he placed his order, a 3-course meal, including the restaurant's most expensive entree. Clara stared at him for a moment, incredulous. "You sure you can afford that?" she asked, her voice dripping with skepticism. The man's expression didn't waver. "I'm sure," he replied calmly. Clara huffed and snatched the menu from the table. "Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you when the bill comes." She stormed off, leaving the man alone at the table. Around him, whispers continued to circulate. Some guests shook their heads in disapproval of Clara's behavior, while others seemed to agree with her sentiments. The blind man remained serene, his demeanor unaffected by Clara's hostility or the whispers surrounding him. He sat quietly, sipping the water she had brought him, listening to the sounds of the bustling restaurant. Despite the unwelcome treatment, there was no sign of agitation or discomfort on his face. Clara returned to the kitchen, venting her frustration to anyone who would listen. "I'm telling you, this guy's wasting our time. He orders the most expensive thing on the menu, and I bet he won't be able to pay for it. Mark my words." Emma frowned, unable to ignore her coworker any longer. "Clara, maybe you're wrong. What if he's just a regular guest like anyone else?" "You're being pretty harsh," Clara scoffed, brushing off the comment. "Oh, please. People like him don't come to places like this unless they're trying to get a freebie or cause trouble. Just watch, Emma. He'll be a problem before the night's over." Emma sighed, but decided not to push the issue further. She had worked with Clara long enough to know when her words would fall on deaf ears. Back at the table, the blind man patiently waited for his first course to arrive. The waiter assigned to deliver it hesitated at the edge of the dining area, clearly unsure about approaching the table. He had overheard Clara's remarks and seemed to second-guess his actions. Finally, he placed the plate in front of the man and hurried away without a word. The man ran his fingers along the edge of the plate, gently feeling its texture and layout before taking a careful bite. His movements were deliberate, his expression thoughtful as he savored each taste. He wasn't just eating. He was appreciating the craftsmanship of the meal. A few tables away, a group of regular patrons had been watching the interaction. One of them, an older woman named Margaret, leaned toward her companions. "I don't like the way that waitress treated him," she whispered. "He's been nothing but polite." Another guest nodded. "It's disgraceful, and she didn't even bring him proper service. Look, his glass is still half spilled." Margaret pursed her lips. "I think I'll say something to management after dinner." dinner. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Clara continued to seethe. When the main course was ready, she volunteered to take it out herself. "I'll handle it," she told the cook. "Might as well see how this circus act ends." She approached the man's table with the steaming dish, setting it down a little harder than necessary. "Here's your main course," she said, her voice dripping with false cheer. "Enjoy." The man smiled gently. "Thank you," he said, tilting his head slightly. "You've been very attentive." Clara's sarcasm didn't register with him, or so it seemed. She crossed her arms, watching him closely as he began to eat. "You sure you've got everything you need?" she asked, her tone barely masking her annoyance. "Yes, thank you," he replied. "You've been quite thorough." Clara's lips twitched with irritation, but she said nothing more and walked back to the kitchen. As the blind man continued his meal, a quiet but unmistakable shift occurred in the restaurant. More and more guests began to notice him, some curious, others sympathetic. The atmosphere in the restaurant grew increasingly tense as more patrons observed Clara's behavior toward the blind man. While he maintained his calm demeanor, the blatant disrespect was not lost on the crowd. Margaret, the older woman at the nearby table, decided she'd had enough. She called over another waiter, one who wasn't involved in the scene, and whispered something to him. The waiter nodded and hurried toward the back, where the restaurant manager, Mr. Andrews, was stationed. Mr. Andrews was a tall, sharp-dressed man known for running a tight ship. He prided himself on the restaurant's reputation for impeccable service and had no tolerance for staff who failed to meet his standards. When the waiter explained the situation, Andrews' brow furrowed in concern. "A blind man? Disrespected by Clara?" he repeated, his voice low but firm. "I'll handle it." At the same time, Clara returned to the blind man's table to clear his plate. Her movements were brusque, her attitude dismissive. "Ready for dessert? Or do you want to sit here all night?" she asked, smirking. The man chuckled softly, as if her rudeness amused him. "Yes, I believe I'll have the dessert menu, thank you." Clara rolled her eyes and walked back toward the kitchen, muttering under her breath. But before she could grab the menu, Mr. Andrews intercepted her. "Clara, we need to talk," he said, his tone firm. Her face stiffened, but she managed a tight smile. "Of course, Mr. Andrews. What's up?" He crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "I've received complaints about your treatment of one of our guests tonight. Care to explain?" Clara scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. "Oh, you mean the blind guy? He's been a pain since he walked in. I'm just trying to keep things moving." Andrew's gaze hardened. "That's not what I'm hearing. Guests are saying you've been rude, dismissive, and outright disrespectful. That's unacceptable." Clara's confidence faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "Come on, Mr. Andrews. He's not even paying attention. He probably doesn't care." Andrews' eyes narrowed. "Whether or not he cares is irrelevant. Our job is to provide excellent service to every guest, no exceptions. You know that." Before Clara could respond, a voice interrupted from behind them. "Is there a problem?" Both turned to see the blind man standing nearby, his calm expression masking the intensity of his presence. Clara looked surprised to see him standing so confidently, while Mr. Andrews seemed momentarily at a loss for words. "Sir, I apologize for any inconvenience you've experienced tonight," Andrews said quickly, his tone professional. "I assure you this is not reflective of our usual standards." The man smiled faintly. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Andrews, and yes, I know your name. I've had the pleasure of reviewing the operation of this restaurant personally. You see, I'm not just a guest. I'm the owner." Clara froze, her face draining of color. "What?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. The blind man turned his attention to her, his tone gentle but firm. "Yes, Ms. Clara, I own this hotel and the restaurant. Tonight, I wanted to experience the service firsthand, as any guest would. I wanted to see how my staff treated people who may not seem conventional, and I must say, your actions have been enlightening." Clara's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The reality of the situation hit her like a freight train, and she realized just how badly she had miscalculated. The room fell into a stunned silence, with every pair of eyes fixed on the blind man. Clara's legs felt weak, as if the weight of his words had drained all the strength from her body. She stammered, I didn't know. I thought the blind man raised a hand to stop her, his calm demeanor unchanged. Exactly, Clara. You thought. You made assumptions based on appearances, and you acted on those assumptions without consideration or respect. That's the problem. Mr. Andrews looked mortified, his usually composed expression tinged with frustration. Sir, please allow me to apologize on behalf of the staff. This behavior is unacceptable, and I assure you it will be addressed immediately. The blind man tilted his head slightly toward Andrews. I appreciate your intention, Mr. Andrews, but this isn't just about Clara. It's about the culture here. If a single staff member feels empowered to treat a guest so poorly, it suggests a deeper issue. Clara's face turned beet red as she tried to salvage the situation. I didn't mean to offend anyone. I just thought you were being difficult. Stop, the man interrupted, his voice firm now. This isn't about me being difficult. This is about you failing to see the humanity in someone who doesn't fit your narrow expectations. Do you treat all guests this way, or was it just me because I'm blind? Clara's lips quivered, and for the first time that night, she was truly at a loss for words. The blind man took a deep breath, his tone softening slightly. We all make mistakes, Clara. The question is, what will you learn from them? By now, the surrounding diners were watching intently, their meals forgotten. Margaret, the older woman who had initially alerted Mr. Andrews, spoke up. Sir, I don't mean to intrude, but I'd like to say something. She stood slowly, her hands gripping the edge of her table for support. I've been coming here for years, and this young lady's behavior tonight was disgraceful. But I think it's important she understands the harm she caused. Sometimes it takes being held accountable to truly change. The blind man nodded thoughtfully. You're right, Margaret. Accountability is key. Turning back to Clara, he said, Clara, I'm not here to ruin your career, but you need to understand that the way you treat people, any people, reflects not just on you, but on this establishment and everyone who works here. Clara swallowed hard, her voice trembling. I'm so sorry. I know I messed up. I believe you, the man replied, his tone steady but firm. But words alone aren't enough. Your actions moving forward will determine whether you've truly learned from this. Mr. Andrews cleared his throat. Sir, if I may, I'd like to suggest that Clara undergo immediate retraining. If she's willing, we can enroll her in our customer service program and have her mentored by one of our senior staff. Clara looked at the blind man, her voice barely above a whisper. Please, give me another chance. I'll do whatever it takes. The man paused, considering her plea. Finally, he nodded. Very well, but understand this, Clara. You're on probation. Any further behavior like tonight's, and you'll no longer be welcome here. Clara nodded fervently, tears streaming down her face. Thank you. I promise I'll do better. The blind man turned to the rest of the room, addressing the staff and patrons alike. Let tonight be a lesson for all of us. It's easy to judge people by what we see or think we see, but we must remember that every person has value, whether or not it's immediately apparent. Applause broke out across the room, the diners showing their appreciation for the man's wisdom and restraint. Clara wiped her tears and took a deep breath, her shame replaced by a determination to prove herself. As the blind man prepared to leave, Margaret approached him and gently touched his arm. Thank you for handling this with such grace. It's not every day we see someone turn a moment of ugliness into a lesson. He smiled. Thank you, Margaret. Change starts with moments like these. The night ended with Clara quietly assisting the rest of the staff, her demeanor subdued but resolute. She had been given a second chance, and she intended to make the most of it. Meanwhile, the blind man left the restaurant, his steps sure and confident, knowing that his lesson had left a lasting impression on everyone present. But as he exited into the cool night air, he couldn't help but think about the work that remained. To create a culture where everyone was treated with dignity and respect, no matter their circumstances, and he was determined to make it happen. Continua tu dihiste. Continua ChatGPT plus ChatGPT. The next day, Clara arrived at the hotel with a knot of nervous anticipation in her stomach. She had hardly slept after the events of the previous night, her mind replaying every moment. The humiliation, the lesson, and the second chance she had been granted weighed heavily on her. But instead of wallowing in regret, Clara resolved to face the consequences head-on. As she entered the employee lounge, Mr. Andrews was already waiting for her, clipboard in hand. His usual warm demeanor was replaced with a stern expression. "Good morning, Clara. Are you ready to begin your retraining?" "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice steady despite the fear twisting in her chest. "I want to make this right." "Good," he said, his tone softening slightly. "The first step is understanding our core values. Follow me." Clara spent the morning in a training room, watching videos and reading through manuals about customer service excellence and diversity. She learned about the importance of empathy, the value of active listening, and the dangers of unconscious bias. Each module felt like a mirror, reflecting back her behavior from the night before. It was humbling, but it was exactly what she needed. By lunchtime, Clara felt mentally exhausted but determined. She knew her journey was just beginning. Mr. Andrews approached her with a small smile. "How are you holding up?" "It's a lot to take in," Clara admitted, "but I'm learning." "Good," he said. "This afternoon you'll shadow one of our senior staff members, Maria. She's one of the best we have, and you can learn a lot from her." Maria was a seasoned waitress with the years of experience and a reputation for her kindness and professionalism. Clara watched as Maria moved through the dining room with grace, engaging with the guests and making each one feel special. Maria didn't just take orders, she created experiences. As they worked together, Maria shared stories of her own missteps early in her career. "We all make mistakes, Clara," she said gently. "What matters is how we grow from them. You're already taking the first step by being here." Clara nodded, her admiration for Maria growing with each passing hour. She realized that true hospitality wasn't just about serving food, it was about serving people. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the blind man, whose name was revealed to be Victor Hayes, was taking action to address the systemic issues he had witnessed. As the owner of the hotel, he called a meeting with his senior management team, including Mr. Andrews, the HR director, and the head of operations. "We need to do better," Victor said firmly. "Last night wasn't just about Clara, it was a symptom of a larger problem, a lack of accountability and awareness across the board." The team agreed, and together they devised a comprehensive plan. It included mandatory sensitivity training for all employees, an anonymous feedback system for guests and staff, and the creation of a diversity and inclusion committee to oversee ongoing efforts. As days turned into weeks, Clara's attitude began to shift noticeably. She became more attentive, more patient, and more understanding with guests. Her interactions were no longer rushed or transactional. Instead, she took the time to listen, to empathize, and to connect. One evening, Victor returned to the hotel unannounced. This time, he dressed casually, blending in with the other guests. He took a seat in Clara's section, observing her carefully. When she approached his table, she greeted him warmly, her voice steady and sincere. "Good evening, sir. Welcome back. May I start you off with something to drink?" she asked. Victor smiled. "Just water for now, thank you." As the meal progressed, Clara handled every interaction with poise and professionalism. She didn't seem nervous or overly eager to impress. She was simply doing her job and doing it well. When Victor finished his meal, he asked to speak with her privately. In the quiet corner of the dining room, he said, "Clara, I wanted to tell you personally how impressed I am with your progress. You've come a long way." Clara's cheeks flushed with pride. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes. I've worked hard to be better." "And it shows," he said. "But remember, growth is a continuous journey. Keep striving, and you'll do great things." The months that followed brought significant changes to the hotel. Under Victor's leadership, the new initiatives created a more inclusive and respectful environment for both guests guests and employees. Clara, once seen as a cautionary tale, became a symbol of redemption and growth. Her story inspired others to reflect on their own biases and behavior, and though she could never undo her past mistakes, Clara was determined to ensure they would never happen again. As for Victor, he continued to lead by example, his calm wisdom shaping the hotel into a place where every guest was treated with dignity and care. His experience with Clara had not only changed her life, but also reinforced his commitment to fostering understanding and kindness in every corner of his business. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories and tell us in the comments, what would you do if you were in Victor's shoes?